At an inheritance meeting, my daughter threw the papers in my face and screamed, "You're a leech. You probably killed Dad for the money." My late husband's brother just stared at the floor, unable to look me in the eye. I simply stood up and walked away. The police knocked on her door 3 days later. "I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached." The moment still loops in my mind like an old film reel that refuses to stop. The inheritance meeting had been tense from the start, but what happened next cut deeper than anything I'd ever endured. My daughter Nola stood up, her hands trembling with fury, and flung the legal papers straight at my face. They slapped against my cheek, then drifted to the polished table in front of me. Her voice cracked, but her words were sharp as glass. "You're a leech. You probably killed Dad for the money." For a moment, the entire room froze. I could hear nothing but the pounding of my own heart. Mr. Stevens, our family lawyer, sat there with his mouth slightly open, as if words had abandoned him mid-sentence. His assistant, pen poised over her notepad, had stopped writing altogether. And Richard, my late husband's brother, was staring fixedly at the floor, his gaze refusing to meet mine. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. 61 years of life had taught me a simple truth. Sometimes the only dignity we have left is silence. So I rose slowly, straightened my blouse, and picked up my purse. My legs carried me out of that conference room with my head held high, even though inside, I felt like my heart had splintered into 1,000 tiny shards. That was 3 days ago. 3 days of unanswered phone calls to my daughter. 3 days of neighbors suddenly finding reasons to turn away when they saw me approaching. 3 days of sitting alone in a house that had felt hollow for years, even when Gerald was still alive. Then came Monday morning. At exactly 8:15 a.m., a knock rattled my front door. 2 police officers stood outside, a man and a woman, both wearing that careful expression that blends professionalism with a faint shadow of pity. "Mrs. Agatha Wilson?" the woman asked. "Yes," I replied, tightening the belt of my robe. "We need to ask you a few questions regarding allegations made by your daughter, Nola Wilson." I stepped aside and motioned for them to enter, my voice calm. "Come in. Would you like some coffee? I just brewed a fresh pot." They exchanged a glance, caught off guard. I imagine they had expected tears, or defensiveness, or maybe even outrage. Instead, they got an invitation to sit down and share a cup of breakfast blend. We settled in the living room, the same living room where Gerald and I had spent 38 years together, though we had rarely truly spoken. The same room where I had knelt beside a small, crying Nola, bandaging scraped knees. The same room where I had read her bedtime stories, my voice soft in the dim light. The same room where, night after night, I had quietly swallowed my own pain and kept the peace. The male officer leaned forward slightly, setting aside his hat. "Mrs. Wilson, your daughter has filed a formal complaint suggesting you may have been involved in your husband's death. She claims you stood to gain financially and had," he glanced down at his notes, "expressed resentment and hostility toward Mr. Wilson in the months before he passed." A faint smile touched my lips, though it carried no real warmth. "Did she mention that her father had stage 4 pancreatic cancer? That the doctors gave him 3 months to live and he held on for 5? The female officer's eyes softened just a little. "Yes, we have the medical reports, but Ms. Wilson also claims there were irregularities with his medication." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I reached for the old photo album on the coffee table, opening it to a picture from Nola's 5th birthday. She was grinning at the camera, 2 front teeth missing, while Gerald and I stood behind her, our hands resting on her small shoulders. A perfect family portrait, at least to anyone who didn't know better. "My daughter," I said quietly, "has always seen what she wanted to see. As a little girl, she saw her father as a hero. As a teenager, she saw him as her protector. And now, as an adult, she can't bear to see him for what he truly was, a human being, flawed, complicated, sometimes cruel." The officers waited in silence, sensing there was more. "I didn't kill my husband," I continued steadily. "I cared for him until the very last breath he took. I changed his sheets when he could no longer control his body. I crushed his pills into applesauce when swallowing became impossible. I read to him from his favorite books when his eyes grew too weak to see the words. I closed the photo album gently, and I did all of that while he cursed me, while he told me I was doing everything wrong, while he called our daughter to complain about me, just as he had done for most of our marriage. The female officer's pen hovered over her notepad. Mrs. Wilson, are you saying your husband was abusive? The word hung in the air like a heavy weight. Abusive. After decades of carefully avoiding it, of making excuses, of covering bruises that weren't always on the skin, it felt strange to hear it spoken aloud. I'm saying, I replied, that my daughter never truly knew her father, and I made sure she didn't. They stayed for nearly 2 hours asking questions about Gerald's final days, about our marriage, about Nola and me. I answered every single one, truthfully perhaps for the first time in my life. As they prepared to leave, the female officer paused at the door. We'll need to speak with your daughter again. Is there anything else you think we should know? I thought about Nola, about her anger, her grief, about the little girl who had once looked up at me with pure trust in her eyes. Just tell her. My voice cracked then, just a hairline fracture in the calm I'd been holding on to. Tell her I'm sorry. Sorry I couldn't be the father she deserved. When they were gone, the house felt cavernous, like it had been hollowed out. I sat in the living room alone, surrounded by memories and shadows that never seemed to fade. From the hallway came the steady, deliberate ticking of the grandfather clock. Gerald's pride, his treasure, its sound far too loud in the stillness. In 24 hours, the truth I'd buried for decades would claw its way into the light, and my daughter, my Nola, would finally have to face the father she never truly knew. I never wanted her to know. That was the vow I made to myself the very day she was born. I can still see it, her impossibly small hand curling around my finger, her eyelids still sealed against the blinding chaos of the world. I swore then that she would never see the darkness that lived in me, the darkness I had grown up in. She would have the father I never had, gentle, protective, constant, a man she could look up to without fear. And so I spun her a story, a flawless, shining lie. The morning after the police came, I found myself climbing into the attic. The air was heavy with dust, the kind that clings to your lungs, and the place smelled faintly of cardboard and time. Around me were boxes marked in my tidy handwriting, Christmas decorations, Nola's school projects, tax records, 1980, 1990. But I wasn't after anything ordinary. I was searching for one box in particular, one I'd never labeled, shoved deep into the farthest corner beneath the roof beams, a place where Gerald would never bother to look. My hands trembled as I dragged it into the light, the cardboard sighing under my touch. Dust clung to my skin like ash. Inside were the things I could neither face nor destroy. There were hospital discharge papers, each with injuries described in ways that didn't match the stories we told. A small notebook filled with dates and incidents, written in a private code only I could decipher. Photographs, my own arms, ribs, back, bruises hidden beneath long sleeves and high collars, and buried at the very bottom, an envelope, still sealed, my handwriting on the front, for Nola. I'd written it 15 years ago, one night when Gerald's rage had been particularly merciless. That night, I thought I might not see morning. And so I wrote, hoping that if the worst came, my daughter would at least know the truth from me. But dawn arrived, as it always did. I tucked the letter away and stepped back into the performance we called a marriage. The doorbell jolted me out of my reverie. Peering through the peephole, I saw Detective Lisa Morales, the female officer from the day before, standing alone on my porch. I hope I'm not interrupting, she said when I opened the door. I had a few follow-up questions, and I was in the neighborhood. Her tone was casual, but I'd lived too long with men and women who could make lies sound like pleasantries. Detectives didn't just happen to be in the neighborhood. Still, I let her in. This time, I offered tea instead of coffee. We sat at the kitchen table, sunlight spilling through the windows in wide golden bands, making the space look deceptively warm and safe. Mrs. Wilson, she began, her dark eyes intent on mine. When we spoke yesterday, you mentioned wanting to protect your daughter from knowing her father. Could you tell me more about that? I stirred my tea slowly, buying a little time. Detective, Have you ever loved someone so much you'd endure any amount of pain just to keep them safe? She didn't answer right away. That silence told me she understood exactly what I meant. My husband, Gerald, he was a complicated man, I said at last. In public, he was all charm, respectability, a pillar of the community. But at home, abusive, she said, not as a question. I nodded. The admission was still like pushing a shard of glass through my throat, even after all these years. Yes, but never to Nola. I made sure of that. I became an expert at reading his moods, knowing what would set him off. I learned how to place myself between them, to catch the brunt of it before it could reach her. Detective Morales' face stayed composed, but there was a subtle tightening around her eyes. She'd seen this before, too many times. Why didn't you leave him? It was the question, the one everyone asks when they've never lived it, thinking the answer is simple. I tried, I said, tasting the bitterness as I lifted my cup. Once, Nola was 7, I packed our bags while Gerald was at work, took what little money I could scrape from our account, and caught a bus to my sister's in Oregon. What happened? 3 days later, he showed up with the police, said I'd kidnapped his daughter, said I was unstable. He had character witnesses, our pastor, his colleagues, neighbors, all swearing he was a devoted husband and father, and that they feared for my mental health. I set my cup down, my hands now surprisingly steady. The police believed him. Of course they did. And my sister, she had her own children to protect. She couldn't risk being pulled into what Gerald promised would be a brutal legal fight. So you went back? Yes, and Gerald made it very clear there would never be a second attempt. He told me if I tried again, he'd take Nola from me for good. I met her gaze directly, and I believed him. He had the money, the influence, the respect of everyone who mattered. I had nothing. Detective Morales nodded slowly. And you never told Nola any of this? How could I? I said, and I said that she adored him. He made sure of that, showering her with gifts, attention, always the fun parent, while I was left to be the one who said no. By the time my daughter hit her teenage years, she had decided I was nothing more than a bitter, controlling figure, the villain in the story she had written about her life. The detective jotted a few notes in her small, leather-bound pad, then glanced up at me. Mrs. Wilson, she asked, did your daughter ever actually witness anything between you and your husband? I let out a slow breath. She saw the aftermath sometimes, a split lip I'd pass off as the result of walking into a door. A broken wrist, I claimed, happened when I slipped on the stairs. But Gerald, he was careful. He saved the worst of himself for moments when Nola wasn't home. And now, she said evenly, she believes you killed him. A short, humorless laugh escaped me, more a hollow echo than a sound of mirth. Ironic, isn't it? I spent decades keeping him alive, managing his medications, driving him to appointments, researching every possible treatment, doing all that, even when some small part of me quietly wished for the freedom his death might bring. Detective Morales was silent for a beat, her pen still, her gaze sharp. Then she said, we found something interesting when we spoke to your daughter yesterday. She reached into her bag, pulled out her phone, and with a few swipes, set it down on the table between us. Do you recognize this? On the screen was a photograph of a sheet of paper, handwritten in Gerald's unmistakable looping scrawl. The words were simple, chilling. If anything happens to me, look closer at Agatha. She's not who you think she is. My stomach dropped like a stone. When did he write this? About a month before he died, she replied. Nola found it tucked inside his Bible. I almost laughed again, this time at the sheer predictability of it. Of course, Gerald's final manipulation, his parting gift. He couldn't stand the thought of me living without his control. Even from beyond the grave, he found a way to keep his hands on the strings. Mrs. Wilson, I said to myself as much as to her, my voice steadier than I felt. My husband knew he was dying. He couldn't bear losing control of the narrative. That note, it was his way of making sure I never found peace. The detective studied me for a long, measuring moment. We're also looking into some financial discrepancies in your husband's estate, she said at last. Large withdrawals in the months before his death. Money moved into accounts we can't trace. That was news to me. I don't know anything about that, I said. and it was the truth. Gerald handled all of our finances. But she leaned back slightly. Ms. Wilson, your daughter, seems to think you were hiding money, that you were preparing for his death. The bitter humor of it almost made me laugh outright. Detective, I haven't had access to our bank accounts in 20 years. Gerald gave me a household allowance, every cent closely monitored. I had to keep receipts for everything I bought. I saw her take that in, her mind rearranging the puzzle pieces into a new picture. There's one more thing, she said, her tone softer now. Your daughter will be coming in for another interview tomorrow morning. Given what you've told me, it might be time for some truths to come to light. The fear that surged through me was instant and raw. No, please. She can't know. Mrs. Wilson, Morales interrupted gently but firmly. Your daughter has accused you of murder. The truth is your best defense now. When she left, the silence in the house felt enormous. I went up to the attic, to the box I'd kept hidden for decades. My fingers closed around the heavy envelope addressed to Nola. Sometimes protecting the people you love means letting them face truths that will hurt them. I just never thought it would come to this. That night, I sat in Gerald's old leather armchair, the envelope in my lap. I'd read and reread the letter inside so many times the paper had grown soft at the folds. Every word was carved into my memory, an unflinching record of pain I had spent a lifetime keeping from the world. Sleep never came. Instead, my mind rolled through our marriage like a grim slideshow. Gerald hurling plates to the floor because dinner was 5 minutes late. Gerald's fingers digging into my arm until dark bruises bloomed by morning. Gerald's apologies, cold, calculated, and the strange stillness that always followed before the next storm. When dawn broke, the golden light spilled across the same living room floor where I had once lain. Ribs cracked from when he pushed me down the stairs. I'd stayed silent then, terrified to call for help because Nola was having a sleepover with friends. At precisely 9 a.m., and the doorbell rang. I already knew who it would be. Detective Morales stood there, giving me a quick once-over. You look like you haven't slept, she observed, a flicker of concern breaking through her professional mask. I've been preparing, I said, gesturing toward the box I'd carried down from the attic, now resting on the coffee table. She nodded, understanding immediately. Is that what I think it is? Evidence, I confirmed. 38 years of it. She sat across from me, hesitating. Ms. Wilson, before we go through this, there's something you should know. We've uncovered more about your husband's financial activities. My heartbeat quickened. What kind of discoveries? Your husband had a second bank account, one you didn't know about. She watched my reaction closely. There were regular transfers into it for years, money. The money had been siphoned out of our joint savings account. The total sum wasn't just large, it was staggering. But I couldn't even muster surprise. Gerald had always been secretive when it came to money, as if every dollar were a rare gemstone that had to be locked away and rationed out with precision. Every grocery receipt, every bill, every minor expense. He demanded an explanation, a justification. Detective Morales' voice cut through my thoughts. There's more, she said. I looked at her, bracing myself. 2 weeks before his death, your husband changed his will. In this new version, he added language suggesting you might have been mistreating him during his illness. She paused, her tone heavy. He was laying groundwork, Mrs. Wilson. A bitter, humorless laugh escaped me before I could stop it. Of course he was. Gerald always thought 10 steps ahead. Always. There's one more thing. She hesitated, almost reluctant. We found evidence that he had been in contact with an old college friend of yours, a James Harrington. The name landed like a physical blow to my chest. My stomach tightened, and my breath caught it in my throat. I hadn't heard that name in decades. I hadn't even allowed myself to think it. James? My voice didn't even sound like mine. It was thin, brittle. That's not possible. I haven't spoken to him since before Nola was born. Detective Morales watched me with sharp, searching eyes. Your husband reached out to him about 3 months before his death. We have copies of their email correspondence. Mr. Wilson seemed particularly interested in Mr. Harrington's memories of you from your college years. And in that instant, the scattered pieces snapped together with a sickening clarity. Gerald had been building a case against me, not just in the present, but by reaching back into my past, decades back, shaping a narrative to suit his purpose. And James, dear, gentle James, the man who had once asked me to marry him before Gerald swept in and claimed my future. What had he told my husband? I need to see those emails, I said. My voice was steadier than I felt. Detective Morales opened her bag, pulled out a manila folder, and slid it across the table. Take your time. The exchanges were short, almost sterile in tone. Gerald introduced himself as my husband, painting a picture of my so-called deteriorating mental state as his illness advanced. James's replies were polite but distant, clearly uncomfortable with the whole thing. Then I reached the last email. It was from Gerald, sent just weeks before his death. I appreciate your discretion, Mr. Harrington. I understand your reluctance to discuss your relationship with Agatha, but as her husband, I have a right to know about her past behaviors. Her outbursts have become increasingly concerning as my health declines. James's reply was short, but it pierced straight through the fog Gerald had tried to create. Mr. Wilson, I knew Agatha as a kind, gentle person who never displayed the behaviors you're describing. If she has changed so drastically, perhaps the question is not what's wrong with her, but what has happened to her over the years. I wish you both well, but I will not be responding to further inquiries. Tears blurred the page. After all these years, James had defended me, had seen through Gerald's manipulations in a way so few ever had. Detective Morales' voice was softer now. He contacted others too, old friends, former colleagues. Most of them responded the same way Mr. Harrington did. I closed the folder, my fingers resting on the cardboard as a strange calm settled over me. Gerald hadn't just been poisoning my present. He had been laying traps in the past, making sure that if I ever spoke out after his death, no one would believe me. Yes, I said quietly. And he was also planting seeds for our daughter's suspicions. The detective nodded toward the box between us. Now, tell me what you've been keeping all these years. One by one, I pulled out the artifacts of my silent suffering. Medical records detailing accidental injuries. A small notebook filled with coded entries, symbols and phrases only I understood, documenting incidents Gerald could never decipher. Photographs of bruises and cuts, each labeled with dates and hidden away where no one would find them. Bank statements charting the slow chokehold he'd placed on my financial freedom. Detective Morales studied them, then looked back at me. Why keep all of this if you never intended to use it? I let the question hang in the air for a moment before answering. At first, it was self-preservation. I thought, if things ever got bad enough, I'd need proof. Later, it became something else. A kind of validation, I suppose. Proof that I wasn't imagining it, that I wasn't losing my mind, that it was real. And you never showed any of this to Nola? I shook my head firmly. I wanted her to have a father she could love, even if it meant she couldn't love me completely. The detective was silent for a long while, her gaze lingering on the photographic evidence of my decades of abuse. Finally, she looked up. Mrs. Wilson, your daughter will be at the station at noon today. I'd like you to be there. Fear tightened like a noose around my throat. I don't think that's a good idea. It's time, Mrs. Wilson. The truth needs to come out, not just for you, but for her. She gestured to the box. May I take these as evidence? I nodded, though the act felt like surrendering a part of myself. For so long, those documents, those photographs, those witnesses had been my only allies in the silence. Detective Morales carefully packed the items away, her hands precise, almost reverent. Before leaving, she paused and met my eyes. Her voice was warm but steady. You've protected your daughter for decades, but sometimes the greatest act of love is letting someone face the truth, no matter how painful. When the door closed behind her, the house seemed impossibly quiet. I stood alone, feeling strangely lighter, even with the weight of what was coming. In just a few hours, the fragile world I had built for Nola would shatter. The father she idolized, the mask I'd worn for so many years, the one that kept her from seeing the monster I had hidden inside, was about to shatter. The grandfather clock in the hallway, Gerald's pride and joy, ticked with a sharp, unrelenting beat that filled the silence. The sound felt louder than it had any right to be. each swing of the pendulum an accusation. I crossed the room, my fingers curling around the brass bob, and stopped at mid-swing. The silence that followed was heavy, almost reverent. Some clocks needed to stop. Some truths had waited long enough to be heard. The police station was far busier than I'd imagined for a Tuesday afternoon. The place was alive with a steady hum of motion, officers moving briskly down narrow hallways, phones ringing without pause, doors opening and closing with quick, decisive clicks. Somewhere out of sight, a man's voice rose above the din, loud and desperate, proclaiming his innocence to anyone who would listen. Detective Morales met me at the front desk. Her sharp, composed expression softened just a fraction when she saw my white-knuckled grip on my purse. "Mrs. Wilson," she greeted, her tone professional, yet warm enough to keep me from bolting. "Thank you for coming. We're set up in interview room 3. She guided me down a narrow corridor lined with glass-walled rooms. Each one held a fragment of someone else's crisis. A young woman sobbing into her hands, an elderly man gesturing animatedly at a uniformed officer, his voice muffled but urgent. Every room was a paused life, every face telling a story that had been interrupted, much like mine. "Your daughter's already here," Detective Morales said when we stopped in front of a door. "She's been speaking with my partner, Detective Rivera." My heart began pounding hard against my ribs. "Does she know I'm coming?" "Not yet. We thought it would be better this way." Better, as if anything about this could possibly be better. The room was small, just a rectangular table in the middle, 4 metal chairs around it, and a camera in the corner blinking its red eye, silently recording everything. Nola sat with her back to the door, posture stiff and guarded. Even from behind, I could see the tension woven through her frame, shoulders bunched, head angled slightly down. She had always carried her tension the same way I did, in the same places. Detective Rivera, a man in his 50s with gentle eyes and streaks of silver at his temples, looked up when we entered. Nola turned toward us, and the shock on her face hardened into anger almost instantly. "What is she doing here?" she demanded, half rising from her chair. "I'm not talking to her." "Ms. Wilson," Detective Rivera said in a calm, even tone, "please sit down. Your mother is here at our request." "Then I'm leaving." She snatched up her purse, but Detective Morales moved smoothly to block the door. "Miss Wilson, you're not under arrest," Morales said firmly, "but I strongly advise you to stay. We have new information about your father's death and about your parents' marriage that you need to hear." Nola's gaze flicked between the 2 detectives before settling on me. What I saw there made my breath hitch. Hatred, unfiltered and raw. "Whatever lies she's told you," Nola began. "Nola," I cut in, my voice steadier than I felt. "Please, just listen." Something in my tone must have reached her because she lowered herself slowly back into her chair. Her body stayed coiled, ready to spring away at the first excuse. But she stayed. I slid into the chair across from her, setting my purse on the table between us as if it could shield me. Detective Morales sat beside me. Detective Rivera remained next to Nola. "Ms. Wilson," Morales began, "we've been investigating your allegations against your mother thoroughly. In doing so, we uncovered evidence that paints a very different picture of your parents' relationship than the one you've given us." Nola's jaw tightened. "What are you talking about?" Rivera placed a manila folder on the table. "These are medical records documenting injuries your mother sustained during her marriage to your father. Broken ribs, a fractured wrist, severe bruising consistent with physical assault." He opened the folder, revealing photographs I hadn't seen in years. Me with a black eye forcing a smile through the swelling. Me with deep, angry fingerprint bruises wringing my neck. Me with a split lip and a jagged gash across my cheekbone, the kind that took 7 stitches to close. Nola stared at the images, the color draining from her face. This can't be right." "It is right, Nola," I said softly. "Your father was not the man you thought he was." "No." She shook her head, sharp and fast, like she could shake the truth away. "No, Dad would never. He loved us. He protected us." "He protected you," I corrected gently, "because I made sure of it." Detective Morales slid another document across the table. We also found financial records showing your father systematically isolated your mother economically. He controlled every account, monitored her spending, and funneled large sums into private accounts she didn't even know existed. And most importantly, Detective Rivera added, we've found evidence that your father was building a false narrative about your mother in the months before his death. He reached out to her old friends, former coworkers, even distant relatives, trying to convince them she was unstable or abusive. Nola's hands trembled as she pushed the photographs away. I don't believe this. My father was a good man. To you, I said, my throat tightening around the words. He was a good father to you because I made sure of it. I took the rage, the control, the violence, so you wouldn't have to. For the first time, Nola really looked at me, and for just a heartbeat, I thought she might actually see me. Years, she said at last, the word almost catching in her throat. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you leave him? I drew in a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I tried once, I said softly. When you were 7, I told you, at least part of it, about the time I tried to get us out, how we almost made it. But Gerald, he threatened to take you away from me forever if I tried again. I couldn't lose you, Nola. So I stayed. I endured, and I made sure you never saw the very worst of him. Detective Morales placed another thick folder on the table with a muted thump. Ms. Wilson, she began, her voice measured, we've reviewed the medication records from your father's hospice care. There were no irregularities. Your mother administered everything exactly as prescribed. The hospice nurses have confirmed that. And we also spoke with Dr. Patel, who treated your father in his final months. Detective Rivera leaned in slightly. He confirmed your father's death was consistent with the natural progression of his illness. There is absolutely no evidence of foul play. Nola sat frozen, eyes fixed on the photos spread in front of her like shards of a broken life. I could see it, the crumbling of the perfect father she had carried in her heart, the truth hitting her like an unseen wave. Then why did he write that note? She whispered. So quietly I almost didn't hear. Why did he warn me about you? Because, I answered, my voice steady despite the ache inside me. He couldn't bear the thought of losing control. Even in death, he wanted to make sure I would suffer, that you would never trust me. Her eyes glistened, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. All those times I thought you were careless, when I had those accidents, when I fell down the stairs, when I burned my arm on the stove. Her voice faltered. They weren't accidents, were they? I shook my head slowly. And I blamed you, she said, horror dawning. When Dad got angry, I thought it was your fault. I thought you provoked him. That's exactly what he wanted you to think. The silence that followed was heavy enough to press against our chests, thick with decades of unspoken truths and carefully crafted lies. Finally, Detective Morales spoke, her tone both gentle and firm. Ms. Wilson, based on our investigation, we're dismissing your complaint against your mother. There's no evidence of any wrongdoing on her part. In fact, everything points toward her being the victim of prolonged domestic abuse. Nola's nod was mechanical, her gaze still locked on the photographs, as if they might rearrange themselves into something less painful. We'll give you two some privacy, Detective Rivera said, rising to his feet. Take as much time as you need. When they left, the room seemed to shrink, leaving just the two of us and the raw, ugly truth sprawled between us like an open wound. Why didn't you hate me? She asked at last, her voice barely above a whisper. All those years I took his side. I believed him. I treated you like I deserved it, I finished gently. She swallowed hard. I accused you of murder. Yes, you did. Her face twisted. How can you ever forgive me for that? I reached across the table, my hand trembling slightly, half expecting her to pull away. She didn't. I don't know if forgiveness is what we need right now, I said honestly. Maybe what we need is to start over, to see each other without your father standing between us. Her fingers tightened around mine. I don't know how to do that. Neither do I admitted, but I'd like to try. And there, across the same table where accusations had been thrown just days earlier, something shifted. Not forgiveness, not yet, but maybe the first fragile thread of understanding. Outside the interview room, life in the police station went on, Phones ringing, officers moving briskly, other people's emergencies unfolding in their own corners of the world. But in our little square of space, time felt suspended. A mother and daughter, staring across the wreckage of a shared past, considering the fragile possibility of something different. The drive home was silent. Nola sat in the passenger seat of my aging Buick, her gaze fixed out the window as familiar suburban streets slipped by in slow motion. I kept my attention on the road, afraid that if I looked at her, this fragile truce might shatter. When I pulled into my driveway, she spoke. "I'd like to come in," she said quietly, "if that's okay." I only nodded, my voice refusing to cooperate. We walked side by side up the path to the front door, separated by 2 feet of concrete and 38 years of misunderstandings. The house seemed different with her inside, smaller somehow, as though the walls couldn't quite contain the weight of our history. She paused in the entryway, her eyes scanning familiar objects as if seeing them for the first time. The antique mirror Gerald had insisted on hanging, despite its ornate, almost gaudy frame. The stiff family portraits where our smiles never reached our eyes. The grandfather clock, now silent. "You stopped it," she said, noticing the pendulum frozen mid-swing. "Yes," I answered. "Your dad loved that clock." "I know." She stepped into the living room, her movements hesitant. "I used to think this was the perfect house, the perfect family." She turned toward me, her expression pained. "How did I not see it?" "Because we didn't want you to," I said simply. "Both of us in different ways. Your father wanted you to see his version of perfection. I wanted to protect you from seeing the rest." Nola collapsed into the couch as if something inside her had finally given way. In that moment, she looked younger than I'd seen her in years. Small, breakable, almost like the child she used to be. "I need to know everything, Mom," she said quietly but with an edge of urgency. "Not just what the police told me. Everything. I need to understand." I lowered myself into Gerald's old armchair across from her. The leather still held the faint scent of him, and it felt as though his presence lingered in every shadow of the room. "Where should I start?" I asked, my voice tighter than I intended. "The beginning," she said. "How did you meet him? Why did you marry him?" I closed my eyes, letting myself drift back over 40 years, to a time that felt like it belonged to another woman entirely. "I was 22, I began, working at the public library downtown. Your father came in one afternoon looking for a book on investment strategies. He was handsome, confident, 10 years older than me. I remember being flattered when he asked if I'd have dinner with him. The memories came easier now, sliding loose from the mental vault where I had locked them away. He was charming," I said, "attentive. He made me feel like I mattered in ways I hadn't before. My parents adored him. He was polished, successful, the kind of man they believed every daughter should marry. When he proposed just 6 months later, everyone told me how lucky I was." Nola leaned forward. "When did it change?" I looked at her and felt the old ache rise. "After the wedding. At first it was small things, criticizing my clothes, my friends, the way I spoke. Then it was controlling the money, demanding I account for every penny I spent. The first time he hit me was 3 months after we married. I dropped a glass in the kitchen, and he slapped me so hard I fell to the floor." Nola flinched. I hesitated, wanting to shield her from more pain, but I knew I couldn't. Not anymore. "He cried afterward," I continued, "brought me flowers, promised it would never happen again. And I believed him. That's how it always starts. They're sorry until they aren't, until they convince themselves you deserved it." She searched my face. "But why did you stay? Even before I was born?" I let the silence stretch while I searched for words. "At first it was fear, then shame, and the belief that maybe if I just tried harder, I could fix things. Then I got pregnant with you, and leaving became complicated." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Did he hurt you while you were pregnant with me?" The question landed like a blow to the chest. "Yes," I admitted, "but it was different. More controlled. He'd grab my arm hard enough to leave bruises, but never where anyone could see. He'd shove me against a wall, but never in a way that might harm you." Nola's eyes brimmed with tears. "After you were born," I said softly, "you became my reason for everything. My reason to stay, to endure, to keep silent. You were the only light in all that darkness, Nola. My beautiful, perfect daughter. She wiped at her eyes, her voice shaking. But I turned against you. I believed him every time. Of course you did, I said gently. He made sure of it. He was your hero, your protector. I was the one who enforced rules, who told you no, who wasn't as fun as Dad. It hurt, but it was a role I accepted. The alternative was worse. Nola rose abruptly and walked over to the mantel, her gaze sweeping over the framed photographs lined neatly along it. These, she said slowly, are all lies, aren't they? All these smiling family pictures. Not all lies, I told her. We had good moments. Your father could be charming, even generous when he wanted to be. There were vacations, birthdays, graduations where he was genuinely proud. But no, it wasn't all real. She turned slightly toward me. My love for you, I said, that was always real. Her fingers hovered over a picture of the three of us at her high school graduation. She picked it up, studying it as though she could will the truth out of it. I remember this day, she said. Dad bought me that insanely expensive bracelet. You told me it was too much, and I thought you were just being controlling about money. She set the photo back down. But that wasn't it, was it? No, I said quietly. That was the day after he broke two of my ribs. I could barely stand through the ceremony. And there he was throwing money around we didn't even have, just to make himself look like the perfect, generous father. Nola closed her eyes, the weight of the truth carving deep lines of pain into her face. I've been so blind. You saw what he wanted you to see, I said. She turned back to me. You said you tried to leave once, when I was 7. What happened? I told her about the careful plan, the bus tickets I'd hidden away, the small stash of cash I'd saved. About the few brief days we spent at my sister's house, thinking we were safe, until Gerald showed up with the police, wearing the mask of the concerned husband. I remember that trip, Nola said slowly. You told me it was an adventure. I was excited. Her brow furrowed. But I don't remember coming home. You were asleep in the car, I said. When we got back, my throat tightened. Let's just say he made it very clear what would happen if I ever tried to leave again. Did he hurt you? Yes, but worse than that, he threatened to take you from me, permanently. Said he'd make sure I was declared an unfit mother, that I'd never see you again. The memory still made my stomach clench. I believed him. He had the money, the connections, the reputation. Who would have believed me over him? Nola returned to the couch, this time sitting so close I could feel her warmth. When he got sick, she began carefully. Was that when you finally felt free? The question hung in the air between us, heavy, dangerous, impossible to answer without touching something raw and deep. Was I glad he was dying? Had I somehow welcomed his pain? I searched for the right words. I felt a lot of things when your father got sick, I said carefully, choosing each one like I was stepping on stones across a river. Relief wasn't one of them. Mostly I just felt tired, bone-deep tired. But you still took care of him, she said. Yes, even after everything he did to you. I met her gaze without flinching. I took vows, Nola, for better or worse, in sickness and in health. I kept mine, even when he broke his. She looked down at her hands, studying them as if the lines on her palms could explain everything. And now here we are. He's gone, and I accused you of killing him. Here we are, I agreed softly. I don't know how to fix this, Mom. I reached across the small space between us, closing my fingers around hers. Her hand was warm, alive. We start here, I said, with truth, with trying to really see each other, maybe for the first time. Afternoon light tilted through the windows, painting long shadows across the room. We sat in the same house that had been both shelter and battlefield, beginning the slow, almost surgical process of unearthing 30 years of buried truths. The clock on the wall made no sound, but something else began ticking between us. A fragile, tentative rhythm, like the first heartbeat of a relationship being rebuilt from its cracked foundations. 6 months can change everything, or nothing at all. For me, those 6 months changed the rhythm of my days. The sounds I heard when I woke. The way sunlight slid across walls I thought I knew. The very next day after our conversation, Nola came back with a small suitcase in one hand and determination in her voice. "I'd like to stay for a while," she said, hesitating only a fraction before adding, "if that's okay with you." I simply nodded and showed her to the guest room, the room that had once been hers. The posters and mementos of her teenage years were long gone, stripped away and painted over in the beige Gerald insisted on after she left for college. "We can repaint," I offered, watching her eyes roam over the bland walls. "Make it yours again." She smiled, small, cautious, but in that smile I saw a flicker of the little girl she used to be. "I'd like that." Those first weeks were awkward. We moved carefully like people trying not to wake a sleeping ghost. The ghost of Gerald, who seemed to linger in the corners, in the furniture, even in the air. Slowly we carved out small routines. Morning coffee together before she left for her job at the architectural firm. Quiet dinners in the evening, where the pauses between words grew shorter over time. We painted her room together, choosing a soft sage green that seemed to breathe life back into the space. As we worked, I found myself telling her stories, not the ones that still hurt too much, but the gentler memories I'd tucked away. Her first wobbly steps, the day she decided her teddy bears needed a bath and tried to give it to them in the toilet, how fiercely she'd insisted on riding her bike without training wheels. "I don't remember any of that," she said once, pausing mid-stroke with the paintbrush. "You were so young." "But I remember," I told her. "I remember everything." Gradually, the house itself began to shift. Gerald's heavy, dark furniture disappeared piece by piece, replaced with things we chose together. Lighter, warmer, more welcoming. His study, once frozen like a shrine, became a shared workspace. Her architectural sketches spread across one side, my slowly growing memoir manuscript on the other. Today makes 6 months exactly since the day she threw those papers in my face and called me a leech. 6 months since her accusation nearly broke us, yet somehow led us instead to the truth, and from truth to something that might be called healing. I was in the kitchen slicing vegetables for lunch when I heard her key in the front door. She was home earlier than usual. "Mom," she called, footsteps quick and light down the hall. "In here," I answered, drying my hands on a dish towel. She appeared in the doorway, slightly breathless, holding a large manila envelope. "It came," she said, her eyes bright, almost shining. "The final paperwork from the lawyer." My pulse stumbled. "Have you opened it?" She shook her head. "I wanted us to do it together." We sat at the dining table, a warm, honey-colored antique we'd found at a market. Gerald would have hated it for being too rustic. Carefully, Nola opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of papers. She scanned the first page, then looked up. "It's done. The house is officially in both our names now." I let out a slow breath, feeling a weight I hadn't realized I was still carrying slip off my shoulders. After Gerald's death, we'd learned he'd left the house solely to Nola in his will, his last attempt to control me, even from the grave. The legal battle to have my name added had been Nola's idea, her first deliberate step toward rewriting the wrongs of the past. "There's something else," she said, sliding another document from the envelope. "I had Mr. Simmons draw this up too. It was a power of attorney. I want you to have it," she told me, "in case anything ever happens to me." Well, I stared at her, this daughter who had once believed I was capable of the worst and saw only trust. "Nola, you don't have to." "I want to," she interrupted gently. "It matters to me." As I took the document from her, our fingers brushed. Her hands felt so familiar again, the faint curve of her left pinky from a childhood. The faintest hint of a smile touches her lips as her fingers brush against something inside the large envelope. I noticed the familiar roughened patch of skin on her middle finger, the callus she developed years ago from endless hours of sketching, one that never fully disappeared even after she traded pencils and paint for computer design work. "Thank you," I say simply, my voice steady but soft. She nods once, then reaches back into the envelope as if she's been saving something important for last. "There's one more thing." When she pulls it out, my breath catches in my throat. Resting in her palm is a small silver locket, its chain so fine it seems almost too delicate to hold. My eyes widen in recognition. It's identical to the one Gerald gave me on our 5th wedding anniversary. The same locket he later tore violently from my neck in one of his rages, spitting that I didn't deserve fine things. How, how did you, I managed to ask, my voice trembling. I found the jeweler's name in Dad's old records, she explains gently. It wasn't hard to have a replica made. She extends it toward me. Go ahead, open it. My fingers shake as I pry open the tiny silver heart. Inside is not the photograph the original once held, Gerald's smirking face, but a small, sunlit image of Nola as a little girl. Her smile is wide, unguarded, pure joy frozen in time. Beside the picture, etched in miniature script, are 2 simple words. Truth heals. Oh, Nola. My whisper cracks under the weight of the moment, my vision blurring as tears swell and spill. I know it doesn't fix anything, she says quietly, her own eyes shining. Nothing can erase what happened, but I wanted you to have something beautiful to replace what he took from you. I let her clasp the chain around my neck. The locket settles lightly against my collarbone, not heavy like a burden, but solid like a promise. As we begin clearing the table of the inheritance paperwork, the final cruel echo of Gerald's manipulations, she speaks again. That money, all of it, had been left to her alone, with explicit instructions that not a single cent be used for my benefit. Even after his death, he'd found a way to try to make me struggle. Even then, he'd tried to pit us against each other. What about it? I ask carefully. I want to use some of it, she says, to start a foundation for women and children who have been through domestic violence. A place where they can get legal help, housing assistance, counseling, everything you didn't have when you needed it. The elegance and compassion in her idea robs me of words for a moment. My daughter taking her father's last attempt at control and reshaping it into something that could help others heal. We could call it the Silent Voices Foundation, she continues, for all the women who had to stay quiet just to survive. My throat tightens. I think that's perfect, I finally manage. Later, we sit together on the back porch, watching the sun sink low and spill gold and pink across the skyline. The garden stretches before us, transformed under our shared care. Flowers Gerald once banned, too messy, he'd said, now bloom in fierce, unapologetic color along the fence line. I found some of your old letters today, Nola says suddenly, breaking the easy quiet between us. In the attic, letters you wrote to me, but never sent. My heart stutters. I had forgotten about those. You wrote them when I was in college, she says, back when I was barely speaking to you. I nod, remembering those years with a dull ache. Years when she'd been fully under his influence and when our connection had withered down to obligatory holiday visits and short, tense phone calls. You never told me how much I was hurting you, she says softly. Not once in all those letters did you blame me or try to make me feel guilty. You just loved me. You were my daughter, I reply simply. Loving you was never the hard part. She reaches across the small space between us and takes my hand, her grip warm and steady. I want you to know, she says, that I see you now, Mom, really see you. Not the version Dad wanted me to see. Not the villain in his story, just you, the mother who protected me, even when it cost her everything. The setting sun catches on the silver locket at my throat, making it gleam like a tiny star. For decades, I lived in silence. I carried wounds no one could see, fought battles no one knew were being fought. I protected my daughter at the cost of her trust, her love, her understanding. But now, in the soft glow of evening, with her hand in mine and truth finally spoken aloud, I understand. Some silences can be broken. Some wounds really can heal. And some battles, even those fought alone in the dark for far too long, can still be won. I see you too, I tell her, squeezing her hand. My brave, beautiful girl. I always have. Around us, the garden blooms in defiance of the years it was forbidden to grow. The house, once a prison, feels like it is slowly becoming a home. No clocks tick out the rhythm of fear anymore. No invisible weight hangs in the air. The silence between us is no longer heavy with secrets, but alive with understanding, forgiveness, and the quiet, miraculous possibility of beginning again.